Well done, Fede. Well done. So Alien Romulus just came out, and it is a Saw X type of sequel prequel to the Alien franchise, taking place in between the first Alien from 1979 and Aliens from 1986. So for a franchise that is 45 years in the making, is this new film by a different director who's never been attached to the franchise before actually worth watching? Well, yes, it absolutely is. Kaylee Speeney, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, who I just saw for the first time in Civil War back in April. She's the lead in this film, playing the character Rain. She has a really interesting relationship with David Johnson's Andy, who plays her brother in the film. The relationship between these two characters is basically the heart and soul of the film, and really what gets you the most attached to the story overall. I think David Johnson for sure is the standout performance here. He just has such a complex character to him, and I'm not going to get into too much about his character or too much in general with this film because the trailers kept it really vague, and going into the film, I didn't know a whole lot other than, oh, it's another Alien movie. And I think that's the best way to approach this. I was expecting to get into a vacuum universe Alien prequel. And while that is the case, it definitely does try to connect itself to the other films, not in some huge narrative way, mainly through just nods and references and callbacks. I'll get into that more in the spoiler section of this video though. I think the characters all around are pretty well utilized. There's some that you're gonna love, some that you're gonna hate, and some that you're just gonna want to die so badly. You'll know who I'm talking about when you watch the film. It's Fede Alvarez. The only other film I've seen by him, to my knowledge, is the Evil Dead 2013 remake, and quite frankly, I'm not a big Evil Dead fan, but that was one of the films in the franchise where I was like, okay, this is actually pretty good. He knew what he was doing with that one. He definitely knows what he's doing with this one. I've seen clips from interviews recently where he was talking about how he wanted to focus more on this universe and paying homage to this universe and kind of, I guess, catering to the fans. Crazy idea, right? He said he wanted to set aside his own personal influence and just make a film that felt true to the franchise. And wow, it's almost like a certain someone should have done that for a certain film based on a certain game series recently. The story itself is simplistic in nature, but honestly has a lot of intensity packed into it, what with all the aliens and the face huggers. And yeah, it's super fun to watch. The one thing I will say before I get into spoilers, this is in the trailer, so it's not that big of a deal. In the past few films, we've had one face hugger, we've had two face huggers like in Aliens, but in this film, we get an entire horde of face huggers. I'm just going to leave it there for now, but it's very, very entertaining and very, very intense. Isabella Merce is in this, and she's one of the supporting cast members. Honestly, she's not bad. I've never really been put off by her in any of the movies. It's just she hasn't always been in the best movies. You got Transformers The Last Night, that Dora movie that I never watched but looked pretty bad, and Madam Web this year. Hopefully she's going to be redeeming herself with this and Last of Us Season 2 and soon to be Hawkgirl in Superman next year, but right now, I think she did a pretty good job in this film. Overall, I think the film was really well made and really well shot. I love the blend of practical and CG, mostly on the practical side. You can tell these aliens are actually practically made for most shots. They are in actual sets. They're not just in a green screen room or anything. Now they do incorporate, of course, CG and other modern technology into the film, but it's used sparingly and it's used in a way that doesn't completely compromise or overtake the film, I think, in my opinion. It feels like a film that's actually grounded in reality for the most part, or at least as much as an Alien movie can be. Speaking of the aesthetic, the whole atmosphere of the film, it feels gritty and grimy. It just feels like a film that if you reached out and touched it, your hand would be covered in grime and grease. Now, if I will lob one criticism at this before we get into spoilers, I will say that structurally, I think this film does suffer toward the end. Not so much because I disagreed with the narrative choices that came at the end of it, but mainly because I've noticed this consistent trend with movies, especially this year, where we have two third acts. I don't know what the deal is with that, but the first one I noticed this in was The Fall Guy, and then we kind of were having a couple others sprinkled in there. Now again with this, and it's getting kind of tiresome. It's almost like they just can't figure out how to properly close out a film in one fell swoop, and so they have to have multiple endings. Now granted, the first Alien movie did kind of do this where Ripley gets into the ship and she gets out and she thinks she's safe after taking the cat with her. And as she's about to get in her cryo chamber, all of a sudden she finds the alien aboard her escape pod. And then, you kind of get another sequence after that. But that felt a little bit more earned and it kind of worked to the advantage of that film. It's just kind of like they had two different endings and they just were like, do both. Again, I'm not really opposed to it, but it did make the film feel a little bit longer than it needed to. Also, the first act is kind of slow to get going. It takes a minute to develop all of its characters before we get into the alien action. And so all that with the 2-hour runtime, it makes the film feel a little bit longer than it should. And honestly, I feel like you could have chopped that down to 1:40. Now, where are you going to start cutting? I honestly have no idea because everything feels pretty important to the plot overall. You'd have to make some pretty significant alterations in order to do that. So believe me, I pity the editor who's having to make the calls as to what to keep and what to get rid of when it comes to a movie like this. And I think they did the best job they could with the script and vision that they were given. But at the same time, I do think that needed to be tweaked in order to be perfected. All right, we're going to get into spoilers real quick. So here is your time code. That's where you want to skip to. And we're going to get into spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Spoilers begin now. So this film is obviously trying to be a direct homage to the previous films in a lot of ways, and that's honestly really cool because I think it is nice to throw in a little fan service here and there. And I don't think this film completely overcooks it like Ghostbusters Afterlife, and it also doesn't totally bank on that as the whole reason as to why you're watching the movie. I honestly went in because I wanted a standalone prequel sequel type of alien movie directed by Fede Alvarez, and I got a couple of sprinkles thrown in there of, hey, remember this? And so honestly, I thought that worked pretty well. So obviously we have an android or synthetic or whatever you want to call it in here that is meant to look like Ian Holm from the original Alien film. And in the original Alien film, Ian Holm played a synthetic named Ash, who eventually turned on everyone. And this synthetic is named Rook. Anyway, I thought it was kind of cool how they tried to do that. It was kind of forced in a way. I think it was definitely nostalgia bait. Felt kind of weird because seeing as how Ian Holm passed away in 2020, now you're kind of reanimating him. Some scenes, it doesn't look that bad because they're clearly using CG to make up his face. But then other times it just kind of looks like a deep fake and it's not that good. The voice modulation, they're making it sound like him while also putting like a destroyed synthetic sound effect over top of it, so it's kind of disguising any imperfections in there. I thought it was a nice nod, at least. Kind of reminded me of Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. But then you have the more subtle references, like the bird thing that dips into the water. I can never remember the name of, but it's like the as seen on TV thing. It's like the bird that stands up and dips its nose into the water that they had in Prometheus and the original, and now they're bringing it back in this. They recreate the shot from Alien 3 where Ripley is inches away from a xenomorph's face right next to her head as she's cowering in fear. Rook even brings back the one line that Ian Holm had in the first Alien film where he says, "I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies." Which, that got a chuckle out of me. And they also brought back a line I wasn't expecting to hear because technically this takes place before Aliens, and yet here they are referencing the "Get away from her, you bitch!" line. Rook is kind of an exposition machine so that they can, immediately learn how to fight these aliens and then they can add more stuff on top of it. But at the same time, he's also kind of just like a way for them to shoehorn in a connection between the Prometheus and Alien Covenant movies because he's talking about the plague and the thing that was killing off all the people and everything that David released onto the population of the creators or whatever they were supposed to be called from Prometheus. Like the whole monologue that he has where he's talking about that, he's working to convince the main characters that this vial or whatever, this new black sludge is good for them and it'll help them. And then they're thinking about using it on Isabella Merced after she gets injured. And then they're like, no, don't do it. We don't know if it's going to work. And the only statistic that they say to her, because she wasn't in the room, the only statistic they say to her is rat DNA is 25% similar to human DNA and it worked on the rats. Now, we obviously know that it didn't work on the rats as we were shown something that the characters don't know. But she knows even less than them. She has never heard Rook talk about this at all. And yet, for whatever reason, when she's on the elevator going up, about to get through a cryo thing, she's like, oh no, my baby might die or is probably dead. And she just injects herself with it. And I was like, what? Like, why would you do that? Like, that didn't make any narrative sense to me at all. She had no reason to know what that was, what it was going to do to her. A rational human being would not have done something like that. But if she didn't do that, then we wouldn't have gotten the third act, or should I say fourth act, boss fight, alien, hybrid, human thing. Honestly, a lot of people are probably going to hate it, but I didn't. It definitely felt like we're doing Resurrection again, but it felt better, in my opinion. It wasn't going on some weird freaking contrived, we're trying to clone Ripley plot and mix her with a xenomorph DNA. It was a freak accident that created some abomination. And I like the design of this a lot better than that stupid thing from Resurrection. It has this humanoid xenomorph hybrid body build, but then the face kind of reminded me of those white creator aliens from Prometheus. And maybe it's just because I like Prometheus a lot that was just kind of influencing how I felt about it. Like, oh yeah, there's kind of a connection there. Again, it was pretty whacked and kind of out there and is going to be the most divisive point of the film, but I didn't hate it. I thought it worked just fine. It was weird, yeah, and I at first wasn't sure how to feel about it, but I think it's not that big of a deal, and I think there is a lot to enjoy about this film that doesn't cancel it out. David Johnson's performance as Andy is absolutely great. I honestly thought he was supposed to be like Kaylee Speeney's special needs brother or something like that, and at first it was something that I can personally relate to and was kind of attaching myself to because I have a brother with special needs. And so I was really hooked into their character dynamic when all of a sudden, boom, he's a synthetic. And I'm like, oh, that's where we're going. Okay. And I mean, I was still hooked. I was still on, it was interesting, but I was just like, I did not see this coming. I did not know that was where they were going at all. And then you get the whole, he's switching the chip and he's becoming one of the Wayland Corp and only doing what was in the best interest of the company, and just how that dynamic switched was really interesting to me. I loved his character. He was the standout, and I think he is probably the best part of the film in my opinion. The film definitely explores new concepts with this original idea for a film. I love how they try to use cryo to fight off the face huggers. I thought it was really creative how they used the aliens' acid blood to the advantage of making a new obstacle for the film. Like in the past, it was, oh man, this is going to cut right through the hole, so we shouldn't damage the alien at all. We're not going to attack it because that's just going to damage our ship. But Kaylee Speeney's like, okay, if I shut off the gravity, then none of it's going to cut through the hole, and I can use this to my advantage. And so she's like in zero gravity, using the pulse rifle to take out the aliens, and the acid's going everywhere, and then she's kind of like Matrix dodging through it and everything. I thought it was awesome, and I thought that was a really creative use of that kind of concept. There's just a lot of really cool creative ideas that I think Fede Alvarez brought to this film. And it does sound like Fede did do his homework with this movie, referencing a ton of the Alien comics and even some of the video games. Like, this guy was a fan of this franchise. This is a passion project for him, and I'm glad that he was able to make it the way he wanted to. So all in all, I think this is a really solid movie and a really solid Alien movie. I heard Fede Alvarez, and I'm like, all right, this is going to be good, and it certainly was. Which is why for a final score out of 10, I'm going to go with a 8. So Alien Romulus, highly recommend you check it out if you like Fede, if you like Alien, if you like both. Definitely go to the theater and see this one. If you like this review, like this video. If you want more videos to show up in your feed like this, then subscribe down below. Make sure to check out the other links in my description. I have my Instagram, my Letterboxd, my Serialized, my GG. All those can be found down below. Highly recommend you follow me on those platforms because I am very active on them, and my reviews on Letterboxd go up well before these YouTube videos ever do. But comment down below, did you see this movie and you liked it? Did you see this movie and you hated it? Either way, I'd like to see how our opinions differ, so I'll be sure to check those out, and I hope you check out my next video. Next week, I plan to have a full review for the new Crow remake. We'll see how that goes, but until then, God be with you, and take care.